Welcome back to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. On this week's episode, we have a guest host, so please be the same respectful audience you are for me and enjoy. Recruiters calling or texting you nonstop? Want to find the right job without exposing your personal info? Need tools to manage your search all for free? In every industry, there comes a moment when innovation challenges the status quo, ushering in a new era of possibilities. Beginly gets it. They get us. Their platform anonymously matches you with jobs that suit you until you decide to share your info. Customize your job search based on economic factors like salary or cost of living, or non-economic factors like location or nearby stadiums or airports. And their algorithm does the rest, all for free. Ready to find your perfect job? Visit beginlyhealth.com/doctoring. Powered by preference, connected by passion.
Welcome, listeners, to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. I am Jordyn Feingold, and I'm taking over from Bradley today as guest host to feature a champion of positive medicine and burnout prevention, Dr. Gabe Charbonneau. Gabe is here with us today. You're going to hear a lot from him, and we are going to converse about burnout prevention. And if you have ever experienced burnout or struggled to situate your own well-being into your patient care and your practice, definitely stick around for this episode where we will touch on all of these topics and more.
Hey, this is Brad Block, host of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle.
Before I introduce Gabe, he suggested that we start off with a bit of a meditation for the two of us to get grounded before we dive in. And I had the funny idea of possibly sharing this with all of our listeners. So if you are interested, this is always just an invitation, and it's a way that I actually start many of my patient visits in my own practice. I just invite you to rest your eyes down, let your gaze move downwards, or close your eyes if you can, if you're not in a moving vehicle. And otherwise, wherever you are, feel your feet on the ground and feel your legs in the chair, and just begin to notice the natural rhythm of your breath. Without forcing or changing anything, just begin to notice how your body breathes naturally. And in a few moments, just beginning to really focus on an inhale through your nose and an exhale through pursed lips like you're blowing through a straw. And if you can make your exhale even longer than your inhale, that is just perfect. And turning all of our attention inward towards the breath. An invitation to put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, to really feel the abdomen expand with each inhale. Feel your heart beating and the belly contracting with each exhale. As the mind may wander away from the breath, which it will naturally, just gently urging it back to the breath without judgment. Perhaps imagining each thought that enters your mind like a cloud floating through the sky, or a butterfly landing on each flower and fluttering away and returning to the breath. Inviting you to take a quick scan internally, whether there's anything your body needs from you right now. Any readjustments, or perhaps you notice you're holding tension. Let something soften. Perhaps you are parched and need a drink of water. What does your body need from you right now? And then a gentle return to the breath. In through the nose, belly expanding, and out through the mouth. few more breaths just like this. Observing any changes in your heart rate or breathing from when we started. And just allowing the eyes to flutter open whenever you are ready. And come back together. Hey, Gabe.
Hey, Jordyn. Can you see how relaxed I am? That was awesome.
I'm so glad. That was such a great idea. I hope our listeners appreciate that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. You are a very impressive person. So I'm so delighted to have Gabe Charbonneau on our podcast today. Gabe Charbonneau, MD, is co-founder of Medicine Forward, which we'll talk all about. He is a rural family physician and high-tech entrepreneur. He co-founded an EHR automation software company called Fluent Systems, and he serves as EHR faculty at Practicing Excellence and has been a physician advisor to the AI scribe companies Tenor and Psycara. He is also the passionate creator of the hashtag Fight Burnout movement on social media and fightburnout.org. Gabe lives and practices in Stevensville, Montana, and I will say he is also an awesome father, partner, and mentor to folks like me. And Gabe, welcome to Physician's Guide to Doctoring.
Thank you, Jordyn. It's, first of all, so fun and an honor to be here with you, too. For the listeners, Jordyn and I know each other quite well. And from our very first conversation quite a few years ago, I just remember thinking, like, this is an amazing person that I want to get to know. So I'm just delighted to be here with you today, and also that we get to spend time together working on stuff that we're both so passionate about.
Yes, absolutely. That feeling was very mutual, and we came together over the mutual interest of tackling burnout and promoting well-being for physicians. And I would love our listeners to hear from you how this passion was ignited and how you came to do this work.
Absolutely. I know this isn't a really long podcast, so I've been thinking about how I can sort of trim my story. The short version of it is that my inspiration to become a doctor started, like a lot of us, when I was a kid. And I'd had a very positive experience with our local family doctor. And it was everything that you would hope a medical encounter could be. I mean, he was just completely present with me and caring. And I walked in scared to a visit and walked out feeling comforted and reassured and inspired that I wanted to be like that. And I mean, I can still see a picture in my mind of what that was like when I was 6 years old. I mean, my diagnosis was molluscum contagiosum. It was nothing really all that scary, right? But it was that, like, going from the unknown to this, like, wise human guide that took me and my mom through it. And I actually fell in love with the word molluscum contagiosum. I didn't realize, but I still hang on to that, about like how that just like imprinted on me. It's cool. Like, you can learn these Latin words and they give you some sense of control over your life if you can put a name to this thing that's going on. Fast forward, I went through my education and medical school and residency. And Jordyn, you know, because you just are now in fellowship and have gone through this, like, residency is super hard. And while that was difficult and challenging, it was kind of expected. My peak burnout really happened in my first job after residency. And I worked in a workplace that was just incredibly difficult. My wife and I took a job together at a community health center, and we signed a loan repayment contract that if you left early, you had to pay back double. The front office manager was incentivized to like double and triple book our schedules, regardless of whether we felt like we could keep up. And it was just brutal. It was really, really hard. And we were trying to do our best. We were somewhat naive, never had a job as a grown-up doctor before. And so we kind of normalized the experience, but it was really, I mean, it was an abnormal human experience. And that culminated, it was so traumatic and so difficult that the two of us were lucky to get out of that job. And it just imprinted so hugely on us. Meanwhile, we're survivors. So I had leaned into some of my strengths. One of my strengths is computers. And so I would make tools to try and help make things easier even then. And simple things. It started with like little voice to text expansions for things that you would repeat. But I even started playing with these little things called macros, which are little mini computer programs that would let the computer do a few steps for you. I had done that, and we got out of that job, moved to Montana, started a much better job, But then pretty quickly, there was the big EHR rollout with meaningful use. And there was a lot of new stress, again, especially with this computer. My experience with that and my interest in computers led me to become fast friends with another doctor who was also interested in how do you be a human physician and get this like technology stuff more into the background. We played around with a lot of stuff. In fact, we played kind of this game with each other of like who could build the coolest macro tool to do the most stuff. And we would like excitedly run down the hall to see each other and say, look at this thing that I could do. I mean, it seems trivial kind of, but like, I think one of the first ones was we did like an entire visit for a cortisone shot in the knee with like a single voice command that like pulled in this node and dropped all the charges and ordered the steroids and all the stuff.
Wow.
And it was like, I don't know, like 30 clicks or something like that. And we just were like, we were so impressed with ourselves. Like we thought it was so cool.
I could use that.
Yeah. So that led to, well, okay, there's something here. And so we got invited to try and help other doctors with that. And so we taught some classes and I traveled around doing some consulting. And then being a super nerd, I actually decided that I would like to build some software. And so we actually built an add-on platform for Epic that would let you put your own buttons to like do these macro automations onto Epic. And so that was Fluent Systems. That was our macro company. Learned so much from that. The take home was the same thing. Like everybody just wanted to be human physicians. And there are all these barriers that get in the way. And I also learned that getting software into especially large healthcare institutions is really hard. So, I mean, everyone that used it loved it, but just the possibility of two doctors who were still practicing and trying to start this software startup, aside from how difficult it is to break through anyway, like we never really got any significant market adoption of our software. But I always had this interest in like, how can you make these things better? Which led to how I got connected with the voice AI companies. I thought, well, maybe I'm interested in computers. I'm interested in being a human physician. I'm interested in helping other people be human physicians because I just see there's such a need. Like it's this, like my friends, then also like the people that trained me just being totally ground to the ground from these administrative challenges and these technical challenges and feeling like it's such a tragedy. I thought, well, maybe I can help in that way. And the first voice AI company I started advising, it was a lot of fun, but also, again, hard to get tech innovation into healthcare. So that company failed. And then I came on as an advisor for Sequera, and since then have been like piloting and advising some voice AI companies. But throughout this entire thing, there was this theme to me that like there's something deeper that's the real issue. And that's when I really started to get passionate about understanding burnout. When I went through burnout, I didn't know it as burnout. I just knew it as in my job sucks and I hate this. And I started noticing people were having a conversation about this idea and that it seemed like the trend was going in the wrong direction. And it was part of what was robbing people, everyone, patients and doctors alike, from having like the real experiences that we yearn for. And so, I mean, that's a pretty good intro to my background in burnout. I also made a t-shirt, the Fight Burnout shirt, and that was out of my frustration because I knew that there's so many good people in medicine that just want to make things better, but we're like so super stuck. So I made this shirt with a phoenix raising the rod of medicine out of the flames, and it says Fight Burnout. And I basically because I didn't know what else to do, decided that giving that to people who inspired me that were advocating for burnout would be something I would enjoy. And that's led to many fun ventures.
Gabe, in some ways, I'm really struck by how cyclical your journey has been in some ways, in the sense of starting as a child, being so empowered to just hear the name of the diagnosis, molluscum contagiosum, fast forward to recognizing these issues that were in your own clinical environment of, feeling detached as a human being from the work, finding technological solutions, using your strengths, and then ultimately developing a t-shirt that, like your molluscum contagiosum, gave people a word to resonate with, to almost diagnose this problem and normalize that this was a phenomenon by way of empowerment, right? Sometimes until we have a name for something, it's really hard to wrap our head around it and understand it conceptually and recognize this is not just a me problem. This is actually a universal problem among clinicians.
Absolutely. It definitely did that for me. And I think that's actually, I'm so glad that you brought it out about how the word burnout can be empowering. I hear a lot of people feel differently about that. And they think about burnout as like this way to blame the individual for things not working and say, oh, that's a burned out doctor. It's a you problem. You need to just like, I don't know, get help, get coaching, work harder, figure out how to be more efficient, whatever it is, right? And to me, I see it as more of a measure of how we're doing. And like, so if the goal for me is something more like flourishing or thriving, it's like a warning light going off in your car saying like, hey, things aren't right. And this fight burnout word is like, no, it doesn't mean that we accept burnout. It means that like we understand that it's a big part of what's going on and the trend's going in the wrong direction, and that like we can be empowered to do something with it. And because we absolutely can, both as individuals and at the systemic level. I mean, you know this, like I'm very much into advocacy. And I think my message is that like both are important. We can make our own lives better by things that we do. I've experienced that, and I know many others have too. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also channel some of that like frustration and that energy and that passion into saying like, we want better for people. We want better for other humans.
Leading a medical practice is challenging. There can be reimbursement changes, referral slowdowns, staff turnover, or drama. There are obstacles in the way of achieving your goals, or maybe it feels like you've hit a plateau. Who can you turn to for help with the business of managing a medical practice? The Physician Growth Accelerator, a private practice partner that helps you uncover and overcome constraints in your practice. They will check your business vitals, identify the root cause of what's restricting your growth, prescribe what to do about it, and help you achieve it, just like we do with our patients. Imagine your practice, where stress is reduced, profits increase, and both patients and staff, and you are happier. They've been making that vision a reality for over a decade. Isn't it time your practice thrived? Discover how at physiciangrowthaccelerator.com.
Yes, I am so glad that you brought up this whole individual versus systemic, what I will call a false dichotomy, because we hear it so often in physician circles, like exactly what you're saying. Talking about burnout is victim blaming. It's blaming the clinicians for a larger systemic issue. And of course, burnout is a systemic phenomenon, and it's a workplace phenomenon, and it is a symptom of workplace dysfunction, not individual dysfunction. And what you're saying is there's still things that we as individuals can do about it. So I think you are someone who I've always really admired, has taken more of an advocacy collective approach while also tending to your personal well-being. I know you have a coach and are constantly, iterating as a human being. Can you talk a little bit about how you tend to both of these aspects? And I want to hear about Medicine Forward too. So if that's integrated into this response, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and answer a little bit of both, because I think, yes, it's a both and answer, not an either or. So I started out trying to make a difference like within our institution in administration as a physician leader, and found that it was like a bang head into the wall kind of experience, in that like it just wasn't very satisfying. I didn't feel like people's voices were really heard and translated into actionable changes for things that we wanted, and certainly not fast enough. When the opportunity to collaborate with Eric Toppel, who wrote this article in the New Yorker about saying doctors needed to organize in new ways, and he and I had become friends, like when he said that, I was like, well, hell yeah, like I need a place where my voice is heard. And other people need a place where their voice is heard too. Like we sit in these meetings and feel so incredibly disheartened and frustrated. So there need to be channels about where you can go, where it's not just lip service to what you have to say. People are actually taking it to heart and saying, what can we do with this? What can we learn? How can we get resources? Where can we put those? Like we believe in positive transformation and we want to be part of that. So that really is the genesis of Medicine Forward and why I'm so interested in that. On a personal note, I think you know some of this, Jordyn. I check my own burnout every week. Every Thursday is my burnout pulse day, and just started doing that when I became interested in learning more about burnout. I felt like it was one thing to talk about it and to try and advocate for it. But if I didn't sort of intimately understand the experience of it, it was not the whole picture. So I take a little burnout survey and then I reflect on it every Thursday. And I reflect on not only how burned out am I, but also the 6 pillars of professional fulfillment. And in those things, what is in my control and what is not in my control that I might be able to do something with. And also, like, where is there a gap? Like, where are the biggest gaps, so that I'm just kind of very clear on where the problems are coming from. For me, of those 6 things, like a sense of agency. So having a reasonable workload, having aligned values, having sufficient rewards for what we do, sense of fairness, sense of control, and strength of community are the 6 pillars of professional fulfillment. And so I just go around that circle. I actually have like a visual representation of that and sort of mark like from 1 to 10 where I'm at on each of those things. And we'll even compare it sometimes like over time and see where it goes. But this like sense of control is such a huge one. And it's so interesting how that's not as simple as it might first seem. Like you might think, well, I don't have any control or as much control as I want to over this work-related issue. Maybe it's my schedule or like the latest EMR mandate or something like that. And so like that can get you feeling kind of discouraged. But what I realized when I started reflecting on that is like even just listing like the things I'm frustrated I don't have control over, but then also some of the things that I do. And how like that reflecting and framing and thinking about like where can I move the needle actually makes a big difference. So for me, for control, so I work 3 days a week. I've done that since our 14-year-old was born. That gives me some sense of control that I have actually 2 days a week when I can work on things that I have complete agency and control over, like running a nonprofit startup where there's all the control that you ever wanted, sometimes more flexibility than you wanted, actually. That's hard too. But there's absolute freedom to do what you want to. And so that gives me a lot of agency. And that counterbalances some of this like sense at work of like, well, here's like another update in the computer that I'm never going to have control over this. I just kind of have to accept it and move on. Right. But so that's been one of the things that's been really helpful. Alignment of values. When I started doing that, I felt really misaligned from my organization where I work. And that was really challenging because when you don't feel your values are in alignment, it's really hard to think your relationship is salvageable. But interestingly, over time, both through coaching and reflection and some other things, like I decided like I'm doubling down on staying where I am right now because I want to stay in this community where my family loves to be. It's the best job for me right now. And spending time resisting what it is isn't helping. I'm just going to commit to make the best of it until I make a different decision. That's been really huge. The other thing is what's interesting is that because I have like intentionally put out there that I want my values to be aligned, there have been opportunities to like strengthen that alignment, especially locally. Like we've built a really great culture in the clinic where I work that actually I think is quite remarkable. The nurse that I've worked with for the longest actually won the Spirit of Our Organization Award for the whole region for just being exceptional in the way she embodies being an amazing caregiver. And I have no doubt that it's because we have had many conversations and supported each other in standing up for things that we truly value. And that feels really, really good.
Gabe, I just want to reflect back to you. Some of what I'm hearing you say is that even though at times you have felt like your organization was not in alignment with your values, that decision to stay was an effort to tap into a higher order value, perhaps, of keeping your family in your community. And it actually enabled you to double down and actually invest more in the culture of your workplace and help to move the needle there where there was some lack of alignment. Is that sort of a good summary?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting because I don't think I realized it before. I was just expending a lot of energy on resistance and thinking like, none of this is ever going to change. It's out of my control. And that's why I wanted to bring up that I think this conversation about what gives us agency and what gives us a sense of control is not so simple. It's actually a very complex thing.
And values that we have may not always seem on the surface to be completely in line with one another or compatible. Some may feel that in order to prioritize family, we might have to sacrifice in some other way. And maybe that's working more hours to support said family, but that means taking away time from being with them. But what I'm hearing is a real adaptability and a constant reinvestigation of what values are. And like the fact that you do this every Thursday, I think is remarkable. And you're constantly checking in with yourself.
You want to hear more about what I do too? So the other thing is I think because I am so passionate, not just about like my own experience of burnout, but like what can we do about it? I also wear an Oura ring and have decided, like having tried lots of fitness trackers, that's incredibly helpful because it gives you these signals of your physiological stress to recovery. And that's a like exhaustion is a huge part of burnout. So if you're showing up to work and your tank is already empty physically, how's the experience going to be? Right. And it's caused me, again, this is like kind of a reflective practice to say like, okay, Gabe, like you can't do all these other things quite so hard and expect to come to your day job as a physician with like a partially empty tank and to feel great about it. Like it just doesn't, it's not working for you, buddy.
I love that idea of we have a finite capacity, right? We are not superhuman. And Gail Gazelle, who I actually interviewed on Physician's Guide to Doctoring with a colleague of mine, Sanj Katyal, who you've heard from, listeners, she said to me once, and I will never forget this, I was a medical student and I was giving a keynote and I was like, doing a lot as a medical student. And she said, Jordyn, just remember when you're saying yes to something, you are always saying no to something else, right? Yeah. We don't have infinite capacity. And if you're trying to be everything to everyone in every setting, something's got to give. And, there are costs to everything. And the question is, are you willing to sustain those costs? Or are you even aware of what those costs are? So Gabe, tell us about Medicine Forward, because this is how we came together. And it's a really amazing way that you are practicing what you preach and integrating this individual and systemic level of burnout prevention and fighting burnout. So tell us about Medicine Forward, and maybe we can talk about some of the pillars of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned Eric. So Eric Toppel is this very interesting friend of mine, physician, scientist, and author. And he wrote this book, Deep Medicine, that was part of what inspired me to connect with him. It was this book about technology, but also about standing up for our humanity. When he wrote that, I knew that he was speaking my language, and it was like yet another person who validated that like standing up for the human side of medicine was something that was worth fighting for. And so Medicine Forward is this organization that he basically wrote this New Yorker piece that said, like, we need to find new and better ways to stand up for human relationships and thriving human beings in medicine, specifically building on a foundation of a healthy patient and physician relationship. Because for those of us who go into doctoring, that's what it's all about. It's our relationships with our patients. That is the entire thing that sustains us, and that we feel inspired to want to wake up in the morning and do this work. If you don't have that, it's just a job. So that's the core thing of what it's all about, is that advocacy for the patient-physician relationship is the entire reason for being, and that there just wasn't an organization that like owned that as like the core foundational principle of why it existed. And so we've been building on that for about 4.5 years now. And essentially, like, so you have this cause, you have this thing that you deeply value. And then the next thing you have to figure out is like, well, what are we going to do with that? It's much easier said than done to advocate for the patient-physician relationship. I mean, for me, a huge part of it has been about bringing doctors and other advocates together, change agents, change leaders, people who speak the same language, who know that they want to be part of a movement for something better, and recognizing that like none of us can do it on our own. So like, I mean, one of our main core principles is bringing doctors and other change leaders together in service of this kind of advocacy. The other thing that I really push for, and I know we've talked about this, is that well-being should be foundational. And that means it should be foundational even as you're building an organization. How you care for one another as the people who are doing the building, because it's a little bit ironic to like do projects and put things out into the world that are supposed to be making burnout better if you're not like actively saying like, well, we're going to build a well-being first organization, right? I mean, I think that has to be part of it. It just, to me, that's integrity. That's a huge part of it. We keep thinking about sort of moonshots and ambitious goals, and the current thing that we're floating around. And we're actually going into a strategic retreat in Michigan coming up this next month. And one of the questions is like, what is the vision of medicine forward for the next 10 years? One idea is helping a huge number of people advocate for the patient-physician relationship. So this is big, but it's like, what if the vision is to help 10 million people to advocate for the patient-physician relationship over 10 years? Because it's like something to aspire to. It is a moonshot, but like we want to create transformation. I mean, that was Eric's idea when he made this call in the first place, is that if enough of us come together, we really can make a difference. And if enough of us come together for something that we share in common, that we really value, I do believe, I've seen it, we're starting to make a difference. Like there's projects that are starting to have trickle-on effects, like our prior authorization work. There's lots of things starting to happen, even legislation where there's change. And we were very early in advocacy on that in our collaborations with the American College of Physicians. And I think that, part of it is building the kind of organization that you want to be a part of with the foundation that you can be proud of.
Yeah, I think it's so important when we're in the spaces that we are in of building a more positive medicine, which is medicine that focuses not just on what's wrong with people and diagnosis and illness, but really helps promote thriving and well-being above and beyond the absence of what's wrong with people, that one, we don't burn out in the process, right? We have to have well-being principles as foundational as is true in medicine forward. I tell my students that I work with all the time in my positive medicine class, we can't burn out doing this work because that would totally defeat the purpose. Like that is really something we would have to examine and really consider. And also that relationship. So in many of these instances, and so embedded in your life, whether it's getting your first job in a clinic with your partner or becoming friends with Eric Toppel after a piece that he wrote and you felt connected to, or even our connecting, relationships are so foundational for our well-being. And I love that you highlighted that that's what compels us to do this work. We know it's so important for patient outcomes too. We know like in conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, I'm sure you see this a lot as a family physician, where there are clear symptoms and clear distress that our patients are experiencing without necessarily something that we can see on a microscope or with a pathology slide. The physician-patient relationship is one of the best predictors of recovery from those conditions. And in psychotherapy, like the mode of therapy matters much less than the quality of the relationship, right? Like these things are not just good for us because they feel good and help us recapitulate our sense of meaning and purpose and why we went into this stuff, but it's actually just better for patients when these things are prioritized.
It absolutely is. And you just made me think of when we were making that burnout assessment to take to the LA Burnout Symposium, and they had kind of this template burnout survey, and you suggested adding a question that got at the strength of your relationships at work as part of a protective factor. And so I've continued to incorporate that in my weekly burnout assessment, and think it's just such a vital, important part of all this.
Totally. There are nights, I can think of this one night in particular when I was an intern. It might've been early in my second year of residency, where a patient was getting discharged from our inpatient unit and her daughter was coming to pick her up. And it wasn't going to be until like 7 p.m. that her daughter was able to come. But this patient and I had worked very closely to get her well after a psychotic depression. And she felt so strongly that I meet her daughter before she leaves the hospital. And, I kind of was like, oh my God, like I kind of like grumbled about having to stay until 7, after 7 p.m. And I was so glad that I did, because it was such a meaningful interaction. And sometimes, yes, I'm not suggesting that we like stay at work past what our hours are and what we're comfortable with, but it's not always a one-way correlation of like hours worked yields more burnout. these positive, meaningful relationships actually, like, I left that night feeling just so good and warm inside and so fulfilled that this is my job and how lucky I am. So these things are vitally important, particularly when we're working as hard as we are.
I love that story, and you bring up such a good point, because I think that one of the great challenges in being a physician is sort of this, like, kind of give until you don't have anything left. And so, like, we know that the relationships are this most meaningful part and how much they matter to us. But, like, the fact that, like, at this point, we don't actually account for how much work there is to be done. If you weren't already overworked, occasionally staying late to provide extra care for someone wouldn't even feel bad. In fact, it'd probably feel good. It's the fact that, like, people are ground into the ground and their tank is empty to begin with, that there's nothing left, that makes it so hard. That's where I actually think that sometimes life happens not on a schedule. When people need things, it's not on a schedule. When your patient needs you, it's not always like when their slot is for their appointment. And that is part of this, like, human experience that we need to figure out.
100%. Well, Gabe, thank you. I think this is such an important, your work is so important. These are such important conversations. And I just want to make sure that if our listeners are interested in what we're talking about and want to potentially get involved in Medicine Forward, how can they find you and connect with you and find the organization?
Yeah, I just realized I almost didn't talk about our biggest initiative right now. So we're working on a big audio documentary project with Matthew Zachary, who's done some amazing work with audio documentaries before. He's definitely worth checking out. So we're co-producing a documentary about the American medical burnout crisis. It's going to have some amazing speakers and conversations and stories. But even more than that, it's an advocacy project called Prescribe Hope. And the advocacy is to basically expand mental health protections, anonymous mental health support protections for healthcare workers in all 50 states in collaboration with the Medical Society of Virginia. We're super, super excited about this project. And so if people want to get in touch with me and with Medicine Forward, Prescribe Hope is actually the project that I would love for them to engage with and learn more about and potentially support. You can definitely find out more about us at medicineforward.org. That's probably the easiest place, but I'm also on Twitter, and I'm not going to say LinkedIn because I don't check that very often, but medicineforward.org is a great place to find out more.
Perfect. And we'll definitely link that in the show notes. So, Gabe, thank you so much for your presence and all of the work that you continue to do every day tirelessly in fighting burnout and trying to make medicine a little bit better for all of us. So thank you.
Absolutely. Jordyn, thank you for having me on the show. It was so much fun. I love talking to you anyway, so this is just a fun excuse for us to get to spend time together.
Yes,
and
I
also
agree.
The meditation that we started with is it's gonna make my whole day better. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, take care, Gabe. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening, everyone. And thanks to Bradley for handing over the reins to us today. And we'll hopefully be back with some more on positive medicine on Physician's Guide to Doctoring. Take care.
Being contacted by recruiters can be a lot. I've been at the same job for over 12 years and I still get texts and emails, sometimes in the middle of the night. Instead, get matched anonymously to find your right job. Beginly Health is a dating app for your career. To swipe right on your career, visit beginlyhealth.com/doctoring. Powered by preference, connected by passion. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring.